it is important to prune your junipers also in fall. It is fall, the growing season is over and all our trees go dormant for the next 6 months. All our trees? No. Evergreens, and in particular junipers, yes, they do go dormant, but as soon as the temperature is high enough, they will be growing throughout the winter. So as long as the root ball isn't frozen and air temperatures are above about 5 Celsius, so that would be about 40 Fahrenheit, these trees will be active. They will respond to the sunlight, there will be photosynthesis, and there might even be very, very gentle extension. But most importantly, there is a clear effect of distribution of power in the canopy during winter. Therefore, it is important to prune your junipers also in fall. Let's take a look at this lovely little cascade that I have here. In spring, the lower branches were very weak compared to the top of this tree, so I significantly pruned back the top of my tree. But now, if we look at the tree again, we see that the lower branches are still quite a bit weaker than the top. That is normal. Junipers, just like most trees, are top dominant, so they will push more growth in the top than in the lower branches. But what does that mean for the winter? Simply said, what is strong in fall will stay strong in winter and get stronger over winter. The top of the tree will remain the part that gets most of the sunlight, will get most of the resources of the plant, and therefore will be strongest getting out of winter. And as a result, once spring hits, the top of the tree will push much harder than the bottom of the tree. And that, of course, we want to avoid. So thinning out the canopy of a juniper, of cascading junipers particularly, but of all junipers in early fall, before winter really hits, can help you to have stronger lower branches on your juniper come spring. Therefore, making your life next growing season easier. It's all about thinking ahead. These lower branches, you can now very clearly see, have a lot less foliage than these top branches. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave these bottom two, well actually 3 branches pretty much alone, and I'm only going to work here on the top. What you can see here in the top is that the branches are so strong that even runners have started to form in the second half of the year. These I'm going to remove completely, and in fact I'm going to go all the way back to the last of the healthy little sprouts here. This could be all the way into the brown, or, as I discussed in a recent video with Xavier from Xavier's Bonsai Retreat, it can go a little bit further out or a lot deeper. Here there's not a lot of side branching going on, but it is the top of the tree, so I'm just going to go to where it started earlier this year. I'm taking all of this out. Here this little side branch is still quite strong, and I'm also taking that out. Now I have a very thin part of the foliage here. This I can do, of course, all over the canopy. Make sure you watch until the end, because at the end of the video I will summarize why you should prune your junipers in fall, but also when you should not prune your junipers in fall. Quite important. It is not for all junipers in all stages. And while I do that, maybe you can make a cup of tea, or actually maybe I should just switch off the camera, because just showing the pruning itself is not as interesting as the final outcome. And I'll just show you the final outcome right now. Well, not the final outcome, of course, because I've only pruned here this top part, but you can see how transparent this has become now. This I can also here do on this pad, which is clearly a top pad, and then I'll have to see whether this branch needs pruning, and this will also get pruned. So on the extending branch, you just look for the core, you thin that out considerably. If it is still too heavy, you can go in and remove just 1 or 2 of these inner side branches as well. And that opens it up considerably. At the bottom of the branch you just remove whatever is hanging down, and then it is nice and open. And you just do this throughout. Go in, look for a suitable spot to cut back to. Look, and if you think it is still not enough, then you go back in and cut deeper. This is a very long branch now, and I remove it at the base. And here this can now be thinned. Hanging down, still a bit thick. On the inside the same thing. As you are pruning, beware that at a certain point, if you cut here, there's no bifurcation left, so always leave at least 2 branches. And if there's any growth coming up on the inside, like here, I'm leaving it in place now. And I'm leaving it in place unless there's way too much. Here there's way too much. So here I can thin out and say this middle one is going. This is all weak and that's going. And this opens up this little pad straight away. Same here, check, this is coming up. There's another one here. This is actually one which is really, really fat. And I'm removing this one because this is going to be next year's clipping point. And then I can remove everything once this pad is stronger. Now with this work it is important to keep in mind that you do this on a juniper that is healthy. Don't do it on a tree that is struggling in any way, because you are now actually removing a lot of the water evaporation capacity of the plant. This means that if you get a very wet winter, the roots might struggle a little bit more. They might not dry out all that quickly. So the tree will need to be very strong to deal with this. And there is a light risk when you do this that juvenile foliage might pop up. For this tree that's not a problem because this species hardly ever creates juvenile foliage. I think this is a variety of the Juniper chinensis blau and not an Itoigala. Itoigala will throw out some complaint in early spring, but it will only be 1 or 2 tufts. An additional benefit from doing this in early fall is that I will give a little bit of a winter spray this year. And this is probably going to be an oil-based spray. With the canopy nice and open here, I reduce the pests quite effectively. Furthermore, by just opening up the canopy, you reduce the effect of pests on your tree. Because they have less place to hide, there's more wind, and for instance spider mites, they don't really like that. Now this tree had spider mites in spring. I needed to treat it. So this aids in combating also pests and diseases during winter. Similarly, fungal infections occur when the foliage can stay wet for a long time. In winter, everything is wet, and therefore doing this opens up the canopy and therefore aids in reducing fungal infections, because wind can blow through and therefore water will evaporate more quickly. And in spring, hopefully the tree will be a little bit better. So there's lots of little reasons combined which make me go through my tree and really thin it out properly also in fall. Now what you might notice is that I have cut back to quite old weak foliage. It's yellowish. There are still some growing tips on here, but it is really open. So I only do this in fall on the top of the canopy. The lower branches I will not do that because they are already weaker. But this is of course the intent, right? I cut back to weaker foliage. The tree needs to invest a little bit in starting all of this foliage back up. And as a result, the lower branches relatively get more strength. And over winter there is a better balance between the top of the canopy and the bottom of the canopy. This area is nicely done. Now I need to move to the other side. And let's see whether I can also give you a nice before and after. So this is the second level branching. This is the top of the canopy. This is the first branch below the canopy. Then the first cascading branch and the second cascading branch. This area I am also going to prune, but not as strongly as the top. Although the outer rim is really strong. You can see that here as well. Nice extensions. So what I'm doing, as before, I'm just going in and clipping these denser parts out of the tree, but it is already less strong than the top was. Here there's a very strong tuft, taking the middle out. Here is still something going on, taking the side branch out. Here also you can see it is now nice and open. In the process, of course, I also look at foliage hanging down from these little branches, and I remove that in favor of upward growing foliage. But this is pretty much all that I do for these trees right before winter hits and right before I might start spraying them with an anti-fungicide and or an anti-animal, an insecticide. These lower branches, as said, I'm just leaving alone because they need to strengthen still. And now, even though from the top it is very transparent, if you look from the front, this is still a very nice filled green area. Never forget this. Frontal view looks very different from a top view. Now let me quickly summarize the reasons why you would want to prune your juniper in early fall. First of all, if you have a tree with lower branches that are significantly weaker than the top, you need to make sure it is thinned out. That way, during winter, as the sun shines, the lower branches relatively gain more energy than the top branches, and therefore in spring the lower branches are stronger. Secondly, it opens up the canopy. Therefore, if a wind blows, the canopy dries out more quickly. A dry canopy is a canopy where fungal infections are less easily taking a hold. Thirdly, opening up the canopy reduces the risk of insect infections. And if you spray your trees with a winter oil or an or a fungicide, this works much better if it can reach all the open spaces here in the top. The lower branches, however, are not reached as easily, so be careful when you're spraying this. Now, when should you not do this? When this tree has just been repotted and the roots are weak, then there is a risk that you don't have enough foliage to keep the roots active enough to keep your pot dry. Second is, of course, if you're trying to grow out the canopy of your tree. If you want it to get a lot taller, pruning it back now is really counterproductive. It reduces the fattening of the branches, it reduces the extension of the branches, and therefore it doesn't work all that well. And thirdly, if you have a species that is really prone to creating juvenile foliage, this sort of activity might result in some juvenile foliage in your canopy in the early spring. Typically, I don't see it really happening, but the risk is there, particularly if the tree is already unhappy. So do it on a healthy tree that is well established in the pot, that you're not trying to grow out, but that you're trying to refine, and your tree will thank you in spring with a nice, balanced, healthy growth. This was Jelle, growing bonsai, with a very quick do prune your junipers in fall. Now, if you don't know in general how to prune a juniper, you might want to take a look at this video here. Then, if you don't know who Xavier is that I mentioned earlier, and you don't know his bonsai retreat, I think we have a nice bonsai for breakfast video right there, and I can recommend having a look at it. This was Jelle, growing bonsai, and see you next time.